2023 was a shaky year for superhero movies. This year taught us that people can't just make these movies and get hundreds of millions anymore. So with Aquaman coming out a few days ago, it's time to rank every superhero movie that came out this year from worst to best. AntMan. This is seriously one of the worst MCU movies ever made. I don't even know why I was trying to be so positive when I did that Kang video, but no, this movie is some straight ass. Everything that happens in this movie is contrived to the shitty plot. We are talking about a movie where the characters literally get sucked into a dimension with a random machine. The writing is terrible. You can see exactly what the movie's trying to do or what emotion it's trying to convey, but everything is so lazily set up that only the most brain dead will be affected. This shitty writing plagues everything about the movie. Every returning character is now dog shit because they're being pulled around by this shitty script. The effects also look fucking terrible. And that's pretty important when the movie's trying to be all mystical, like, oh wow, we're in the quantum realm. But it's so obviously a green screen and the actors don't even try to give a shit. Just imagine you're Scott Lang and you fall into this crazy ass dimension for the first time. And then a big ball of energy is coming towards you. What would you do in this situation? Oh, you think that it would instantly disintegrate you? No, you fucking idiot. You're supposed to run up to it and push it. Throughout the movie, there's so many cliche concepts like a rebel faction or this bar scene where it's trying to be Star Wars. But it's so poorly done that none of it even gets processed into your brain. This movie is an overwhelming amount of mistakes and bad writing that eventually it all just meshes together and you don't even care anymore. There are some watchable moments and aspects that I almost like, but everything else is just shit. Garbage. So I'm gonna give it a 2 out of 10. Blue Beetle. Dude, what am I thinking? This is worse than Ant-Man. So actually, this one's number 8 and Ant-Man is now number 7. This is one of the most dull, boring movies I have ever watched. It's like the most AI-generated superhero movie. No likable characters, no interesting ideas, super uninteresting plot, and it's just so fucking long. These garbage-ass movies don't need to be 2 hours. You have the guy from Cobra Kai. Go back to doing Cobra Kais, please. If you're an aspiring director and your dream is to make superhero movies like this, fuck you. It's not even as poorly written as Ant-Man, but there's absolutely no entertainment here. Like, it might sound easy to watch a movie and be like, what if I gave you a ride? Dog shit. But this is a 2-hour-long slog. I feel like I've given it too much of myself to where it's not like, 1 out of 10. Fuck it. I never want to watch this movie again in my life.
The Marvels, rated PG-13.
So this movie's dog shit. You have these 3 Captain Marvels that switch places every time they use powers. So they have to learn to work together and get to know each other. I didn't watch Miss Marvel, but there were a few times in the movie where she made me physically cringe, and I'm not even saying that as a negative because it actually made me feel something. Captain Marvel has been shafted so many times, like in Endgame where she was like, okay, you guys got this planet, I'm gonna go ahead and help every other planet. And this movie does a terrible job in putting us in her head. She has some emotional arcs that are weak as fuck. The villain is terrible. The plot is so inconsequential to where it's like, what the fuck is Marvel doing? Like, it doesn't even seem like they're trying to make money. This is like self-sabotage. There's this ending where Miss Marvel mimics the original Nick Fury post-credit scene and she's talking to Kate Bishop. Like, who the fuck is gonna watch that, Marvel? But as I said, it did make me cringe a few times and it's not 2 hours for no reason. It's a bad movie with fucking manners. Thank you. 2 out of 10. Aquaman. The movie that delayed this entire fucking video like 2 weeks. And then I got sick. It was pretty bad. On the surface, it actually seems like a fun movie. You have Aquaman going on some Jumanji adventure with his brother, and it's about brother love, and the villain is Black Manta, whose motivation is just hatred. But the truth is that while this plot is almost enjoyable, and some of the characters are almost enjoyable, the dialogue is just bland. It's pretty much just exposition, feelings exposition, where you know exactly what they're going for, but it's not very well written, and then just like awkward banter. And the plot is pretty dumb. The movie does not play to its strengths, I'll say it like that. So yeah, pretty bad movie, but not as bad as what we've seen so far. 3.
That shit's ass, bro.
Spiderverse, this fucking movie, dude. I thought the animation would instantly negate any feelings of boredom, but this movie, I would summarize it as a dull, frustrating experience. So let me just give a quick overview of this movie. This movie primarily focuses on Gwen, Miles, and Spot. Let's talk about Gwen first. In the first movie, she was essentially a shallow character being told what to do by the plot. In this movie, they try to give her depth with 2 things. She's now in love with Miles, and she has Spider-Man problems with her dad. Miles and Gwen had no relationship in the first movie past just, hey, wanna be friends? And in this movie, they spend so long together just talking about nothing. They have no relationship. Their conversation is nothing more than, oh, and Hobby, you gotta meet Hobby. Oh, Hobby, are you guys fucking, or like, can we still fuck? There's literally a scene where Gwen's like, in every other universe, Gwen falls for Spider-Man. And Miles moves his hand closer. And in every other universe, Gwen dies. And it's like, what the fuck is this? And I gotta say that for all these scenes and other scenes that I'll talk about later, they're playing this AI generated ass radio music and it's so fucking lame.
Listen, with a smile for hours. I really would have come sooner.
And I didn't want to talk about the shitty ass plot yet, but why the fuck did they send Gwen to Miles' dimension if that was the only reason she was a liability? I'll tell you why though, it's fucking shit writing. And then the other Gwen character trait is that her dad wanted to arrest her, so she leaves, and when she comes back, he's like, yo, I quit, so like, we're good now. So she basically learned nothing, and the only difference is that her dad isn't being a goofball. So then he gives her a homemade multiverse watch because characters can just do that in this movie. Miles is probably the best character in this movie because he's the only one that isn't forced to be mentally underdeveloped by the plot. But still, he's not even close to being interesting enough to justify all this time focused on his relationship with his parents. Basically, his parents are like, why is your son acting so crazy and stupid? Well, obviously, it's because Miles is Spider-Man. So what's the solution to this problem? Tell them he's Spider-Man. Why is this complicated? Is it because he doesn't want them to worry? No, you idiot, he just doesn't want them to hate him for lying. But listen, I can accept that Miles is just a naturally selfish 15-year-old. The problem is that it's just not interesting enough to be so focused on throughout the movie. I would have honestly cut this shit, but unfortunately the rest of the movie isn't much better. Spot, the walking plot hole whose entire villain motivation comes from the fact that both Alchemax and his family thought he was ugly, so they cut him loose. Like, what the fuck is this Looney Tunes ass shit? Literally, by the time he gets to the Indian dimension, he could already destroy Miles easily. So the movie is either just uninteresting character dynamics or straight up contrivances. I also could talk about the audio and how sometimes it's straight up physically impossible for two characters to be talking.
I did lure hundreds of spider people away from your little clubhouse.
I guess he did plan this out. I'm a good guy. You don't look like a good guy.
But honestly, I think I'm just gonna dive into how stupid canon events are, because they're the main driving factor of this movie. So usually when people complain about canon events, it's basically explaining why Miguel is wrong. Firstly, Miguel's origin has nothing to do with Spider-Man canon events. Miles, despite being an anomaly, still somehow has canon events? Why is Miguel trying to subdue Miles if Miles has to be present for his own canon event? How is Miles supposed to learn responsibility if he already knows what's gonna happen? Why did Spot, the multiversal anomaly, cause a canon event for Indian Spider-Man? Now, Spider-Verse defenders will just say, well, that's the point. What if Miguel is wrong? But it's not the fact that Miguel is wrong. It's the fact that canon events even exist in the first place. They're based on absolutely no logic and have such a weird rule set that it's impossible to take seriously. Firstly, why is the fate of universes only connected to Spider-Man? Why does Spider-Man having specific events happen to him decide whether or not the universe gets destroyed? Why is Spider-Man a fucking god at the center of the universe now? I also think it's funny how the last movie's message was that anybody could be Spider-Man, but now it's just everybody is destined to be Spider-Man. Toby and Andrew, they aren't just friendly neighborhood Spider-Men. They were having canon events so the universe wouldn't get destroyed, guys. That's why I like Spider-Man, because canon events. No other superhero or person matters. Just Spider-Man. Oh look guys, Gwen's dad quit, so now it isn't a canon event because you can just quit. Honestly, I'm about to draw a conclusion to intelligence. If you genuinely don't see a problem with canon events, that shows that you don't think for yourself and you are an NPC. Your mind is clouded and you have no critical thinking skills. You watched the movie and you were like, oh my god, this is such a W movie because it is, and canon events are perfect logic because this movie is W. Canon events also seriously harm the characters because of how artificial it is. Peter B. Parker was one of the more interesting versions of Spider-Man until this movie. The characters are just contorted into shallow plot devices. I don't feel anything for this. The animation is great. Even watching it for the fourth time, I'm still noticing new things. Sometimes I do feel like it's too ADHD, which makes sense because everybody has TikTok attention span these days, but still, the animators did a great job. And it's sad that they had to waste their efforts on such a shitty script. 4 out of 10.
There's nowhere to run.
Flash. Now this movie has a pretty stupid plot, but it's not Spider-Verse level stupid. This movie just has an illogical and honestly really lazy timeline rule set. Fake Reddit scientists have tried to legitimize this movie, but the truth is, going faster than light already breaks real life science. So trust me, you fucking idiots, the timeline rule set in this movie was just made up. I said it was illogical that changing the past would also change what came before it, but this movie doesn't even stick to that dumbass rule with how many times Barry changes the timeline after Flash Flashpoint. And then you also have the shitty ass inevitable intersections. Just lazy ass writing. You have this final act where berries are trying to kill Zod. By this movie's logic, going back would result in more berries to fight Zod. Barry 2 also stabs a Kryptonian with some Kryptonian metal and it kills her. So I'm basically just saying that the rules are contrived to the movie's favor, which absolutely kills the stakes. But listen, the plot is actually interesting. It's fun to see this alternate version of the DCEU and how Barry responds to it. Barry as a character is fine, but I would say some aspects about him in this movie are trash. Like the stuff about his family. This is some of the fakest, most artificial shit I've ever seen in a movie. But overall, I would say he's actually fine. His base motivations of wanting to save his mom and free his dad are pretty meh. It honestly gets me thinking about the Flash TV show and how that might have been better. And while in Flashpoint, he obviously realizes that he has to fix everything. That might not seem like anything special, but putting a joke character like Barry in a position where he has to take initiative is a really good way of making him compelling. But still, I wouldn't say that the character writing in this movie is anything special. And there are some emotional moments that just don't hit at all. But this movie is still fun at times. I thought both Batman and Supergirl were enjoyable, and the overall adventure, while not being anything deep, was kind of fun. But the third act is a mess and the character writing was mess, so I wouldn't call it a good movie. It's a middle movie. 5 out of 10. Shazam! So the first thing I gotta say about this movie is that it does feel like a movie from a director. That sounds like a joke, but what I mean is that it doesn't feel like it came out of a factory. It also has fresh and interesting concepts to explore as a superhero story. In this movie, you have like 10 Shazams, and yet each one feels distinct. Billy struggles with everything in his life changing, and it's actually compelling. This movie embraces its lighthearted tone, and the energy of the actors doesn't come off as embarrassing. But the villains are not very interesting. And this movie has a side plot that is also not very interesting. The third act is bloated. The logic, while not being anywhere near the Flash or Spiderverse, is still pretty annoying. If you didn't know, all these Shazams have super speed, so they're speedsters. And a reoccurring objective in this movie is to grab the Shazam staff. They literally use super speed to grab it like twice in the movie, but then they just don't for the other important parts in the movie. Like for the entire third act, Shazam just doesn't grab the staff even though he easily could. Because this movie is goofy in nature and makes a good amount of mistakes, it's hard to take seriously. There is actually a death at the end of the movie, but I honestly didn't care that much. I would consider it to be a quality movie with good qualities, but I feel like it could have been more refined. So I'm gonna give it a 5. Guardians 3. This is a great movie because I said it was 7 months ago. No, it's not. I feel like this is one of the weirdest instances where a lot of the praise I gave this movie is just not true. I remember saying this movie has some of the best character writing in the MCU. I'm gonna take that back. Characters like Drax, Nebula, and Mantis just don't feel like they have any depth underneath their purpose in the story. And the jokes were actually terrible. It's not just the fact that they're not funny, they stop the movie and the characters almost go out of character to say them. The plot of this movie is basically just a fetch quest after Rocket gets flatlined by Adam Warlock. Like, I guess it makes sense, but at the same time, it feels kind of random and not really earned. The tone of the fight isn't even that serious, and Rocket has been through so much more than just Adam Warlock. And even moments before, he gets fucking slammed at 90 miles per hour through a bunch of walls. That didn't hurt him? I guess Rocket Raccoon has all these flashbacks to friends that we've never met, and I guess it's kinda cute, but the real Rocket Raccoon gives no tell that this even matters to him. It's definitely a retcon, and it's not even a good retcon. There's like this heaven scene where this otter is like, "You still have a purpose, Raccoon." And then Rocket's like, "Yo, I'm not a raccoon." And for the rest of the movie, he's just normal Rocket Raccoon. I think what's missing from this movie is a compelling driving character arc. Because Peter's obviously grieving Gamora, but it's handled as a joke most of the time. And I guess at the end, everybody wants to do their own thing, but it's not really set up throughout the movie. The overall message of animal abuse is honestly pretty $10 on rewatch. But while nothing about this movie is impressive, it still did hold my interest all the way throughout. So I'm gonna give this one a 5 out of 10. Something that I realized in 2023 is that I don't have a strong desire to see a good superhero movie more than just a good movie. So I'm honestly okay with this because a lot of superhero movies just suck. Get good.